All right. Well, welcome to episode 16 of Sports Shorts. I'm Bobby Hacker, immediate past president of the Sports Lawyers Association. And I'm happy to have as our guest today, Scott Rosner, the program director and professor of professional practice in the sports management program at Columbia University. Did I get that all right?
You nailed it, Bobby.
Well, Scott and I have known each other for quite a while now. I even appeared on his old Wharton podcast one time, or radio show. I'm not really sure what it was.
Yeah, Sirius XM radio.
Oh, right. That was
go.
cool. But now I've got you as my guest on our little segment. And as we like to start off most of these episodes, I've announced what your title is, but why don't you do a couple of things for us? First, explain to the audience what the program is at Columbia, and then talk about your path to getting there.
Yeah. So first, thanks so much for having me, Bobby. I really appreciate it, and very happy to return the favor to you. So as you said, we've known each other for a long time. So my position is I lead the sports management program at Columbia University. It's a master's of science program. There is no undergraduate portion of our program, and students come from all over the world to study with us at Columbia in New York City. And it is a 12 to 16 month typical program for most students. Where that's, think about, so if you start in September, as we have a big group starting next month, then most will finish the following December. We have some part-time students who will take longer. We have some students who really go pedal to the metal and want to be done in a calendar year. They'll be done with our classes in August of 2022. We are, I will humbly note, one of the best programs in the world, or so we are told, at what we do. We have a phenomenal faculty. Some of these folks, you don't know many of them. We rely pretty heavily on adjunct faculty who we coach up, so to speak, and very much engage in Columbia pedagogy. Some really, really accomplished people, and go and send students, out into the world fully educated in the business of sports and its adjacent properties, and ready to take on the world and be future leaders.
And how did you, I know that you came from Wharton and you're instrumental in developing the sports law initiative there, but can you tell us a little bit about that and how you got involved with that program at your alma mater?
Yeah, so good question. It requires a little bit of the tracing of my kind of long and winding career road. My educational background, I have an undergraduate degree from the University of Michigan. Went right from undergrad to a master's degree in sports management at University of Massachusetts in Amherst, which has long been one of the stronger programs globally in the space. They're now ironically a bit of a competitor, but not really. There's plenty of room for all of us. And then worked for the World Cup in 1994 when it was here, and then started law school after the World Cup ended at the University of Pennsylvania Law School. Studied there, was thinking I would just eliminate the middleman, go right and become a practicing sports lawyer without really knowing what that meant. Before there was really an internet, before Al Gore had invented such technology, went and sent about 650 emails out to not emails, I'm sorry, snail mails out to basically every sports organization in the free world. My law school roommates loved it because I got a lot of rejection letters, and there was a watering hole near us that gave 10-cent beers out for every letter. So they enjoyed very much the fruits of my labor or lack thereof. And then when I was a third year in law school, I became the teaching assistant. Second year in law school, I became the teaching assistant for another former past president of this august group, Ken Shropshire. And Ken's really served as my career mentor and is, certainly on the short list of my closest friends. And this was 25 years ago. And he said, I'm looking for a teaching assistant. How would you like to do it? I became his TA without really knowing what that meant. Research, grading papers, exams, those sorts of things. And Ken was gracious enough to let me lecture one day because he was off doing something else, I'm sure. And lectured to a group of students. I was the youngest person in the classroom, a bunch of Wharton MBAs. Afterwards, they applauded for me. It was like the first time everyone ever clapped for me doing anything in my life. And I was kind of hooked. And Ken, convinced me to go down the road of becoming a college professor. So I did that. I started at a tiny liberal arts college. After doing a little bit of expert work on some Raiders NFL matters, along with a lot of other people who might be listening to this, and started applying to college, teaching jobs. Got a job at a tiny liberal arts college outside of Syracuse called Cazenovia College, where I started the sports management program. I was a faculty of one, and was a phenomenal experience. I was there for a year, and then Seton Hall hired me in South Orange, New Jersey, to be a part of their sports management program. I did that for 3 years. My second year that I was there, Penn asked me if I'd be interested in being an adjunct for them, teaching the class. Seton Hall was gracious enough to allow me to do that. And then a year later, Penn gave me an offer to come down full time. I was at Penn at the Wharton School for 15 years, 15 plus. And we launched a sports research center there. Did a lot of different teaching in some really cool different areas, and so got to do some really cool and continue to do some really cool consulting projects with a number of different organizations, some law related, most not. And then Columbia recruited me away about 3.5 years ago to lead the sports management program there. So there's a lot of history to it, and it's been a long and kind of, like I said, winding road, but one that has given me great pleasure and joy for a long time.
And with your legal background, how does that really integrate into how you're teaching and setting up the program in sports management?
Yeah, so I mean, I've taught sports law. In fact, ironically, it's not a course that I teach right now. We have people who are much better than me teaching that course at the moment. But it's really helped, provide the foundation for a practical matter. It's the terminal degree that I need in order to, really kind of proceed through academia. So it does serve that practical purpose. But it's really, given me just a lot of, of course, a lot of knowledge about a segment of the law. I think we're all, aware of that. And what the law degree does for you. But it really has, it set the tone at the beginning and became my area of expertise, and then was able to branch out from there but still go back to it foundationally, still do some expert witness work, maybe a case or two a year where I'll be an expert in various matters, anything ranging from personal injury and above. It's been a really important part of who I am. Still an active member of the bar in the great state of New Jersey. Most importantly, the law degree above anything else is where I met my wife. So she was a first year when I was a third year, the relationship bloomed from there.
Well, that's the rom-com part of going to law school.
That is exactly right. That is exactly right.
And the students in the program at Columbia are all graduate students. Is there a wide age range? Do you have people coming back that have been in business for a long time and decide I want this advanced degree in my 40s or something like that?
We do. The students are diverse along a lot of different metrics and different ways that we think about it, from the traditional to the kind of non-traditional ways to think about it. We do have students who come right from their undergraduate experience and matriculate into the program. There aren't that many of those. You really have to have done extraordinarily well at the undergraduate level in order to kind of join right from, because if we think about an application holistically, you really need to have done quite well at the undergraduate level if you're coming right from there, because you just don't have the work experience, right? You may have done internship experience, which we look for, but you don't have kind of that full work experience yet. And so we do have students who come right from there, but we have students who will be joining us momentarily who are seasoned professionals, have worked either inside or outside the sports industry, for 15 years plus. And so really they come to us because they either want to, if they're in the sports industry, want to pivot to something else within the industry, but don't have the knowledge, or they want to accelerate their career doing what they do, but they really need additional, to get to that senior leadership level. They need to have additional experience. So we've got those career switchers in there. And for the younger part of our cohort, it's really just kind of giving them the knowledge they need to launch their careers into the industry. We also have a huge international piece of the equation too. About a third of our students are international. The data that I received last week, or yesterday, I should say, was that our students represent 17 different countries. The incoming cohort coming in. So it's great. It's really global, and students from Saudi Arabia and Ghana and, the UK and Canada and Brazil and Singapore and China and Japan, and I'll miss many others, but, from all over the world. It makes for really interesting conversations in the classroom for sure.
And I guess it would be hard to come up with broad generalizations, but if you could, I'm asking you, are there can you think of three or four things that incoming students are really interested in learning? Do you ever find out that said, I'm taking this course because I want to know how to get a front office job, or I want to know about how the business really works in terms of media relations? Or are there any sort of stock questions you've found over the last few years that especially the incoming students, when they first get there, want to know?
Yeah, well, I think we always talk about, and I've totally plagiarized Stephen Covey for this, but beginning with the end in mind, right? The end, of course, is that you need to get a good job out of this, and our program, I can proudly say, has done extremely well in that space. The students there's only one ranking of sports management programs, but we are number one globally on the employment metrics that we look at. Employment at 6 months post graduation, and salary 3 years post graduation. We're at the top of the mountaintop on those things, which is great. But they want to know kind of what kind of this is before they get there, what kind of jobs they can get. In terms of specific industries, we're seeing in the last couple cohorts more interestingly focused on intercollegiate athletics, which is not really a space that historically we've sent a lot of students into. We have a lot more in the last 2-3 years heading into the sports betting space. And so sports gambling has been a focal point for our students. And of course, it's kind of enmeshed in the education you get in every single class. We talk a little bit about sports gambling in Class A and a little bit in Class B. We're doing a workshop this year for the first time. We'll have a couple-day intensive period focused just on the space. We also do the same thing with esports, which is a space that our students are increasingly interested in. So it's a lot of the adjacent spaces. I think one of the strengths of our program is its depth and breadth. We don't really focus on just one space. So there are programs that focus on and are great at facilities, right? And we have students who will go and run facilities at some point, and we have a phenomenal facilities course. But it's not the focal point of our program. There's others that will focus on intercollegiate athletics, and we do that, as I just mentioned. We have a great course in it. John Curry, who's the athletic director at Wake Forest, teaches that course for us as an adjunct. He flies up when COVID allows, and teaches the course in person. Len Elmore, who's one of our full-time faculty, who's co-chair of the Knight Commission. So they're getting a great education in the space, but it's not historically been like some programs where if you want to work as a college administrator, this is the program to go to, right? We're pretty broad and deep.
So is there a standard curriculum, or are there different paths within the program? How does that sort?
Yeah, so we have a core requirement. So it's 12 courses overall, right, that you take in the program. So 3 credits per, 36 credits overall. There's some core requirements, law and ethics, accounting and finance, a leadership course, right, among those. So we're hyper focused on that, and a foundations course, right, an intro course. And then we have, so those are 4. And then you have what we call selectives, where you pick one course from a laundry list of classes. So you need to have something in sports marketing, something in sports analytics, so on and so forth. And then from there, you can go really deep. So we offer an area that's been really a huge uptake for our students has been in business intelligence. And so, we do have performance analytics. So courses around baseball, basketball, soccer specific analytics courses. But we also have a really deep focus on the business side analytics. And so that's been something that our students have increasingly gone down, but they can also choose to go with our international students. There's a global path that they can pursue for sure. We do have some students each year that will ultimately matriculate to law school from our program. And we have it the other way too. We have lawyers, reformed lawyers who want to come and work in the sports space. And we are kind of the bridge ultimately between their legal career and their sports law career.
That's great. So now we're going to go off topic a little bit outside of your program and stuff. And as an experienced longtime sports lawyer, a member of the Sports Lawyers Association, let's have some general sports chat here, because I want to hear your sense of a couple of things that are going on in the sports space. And it's sort of the conjoined 2 big issues in college sports that don't have the initials NI and L. And that would be Texas and Oklahoma going to the SEC, and the new recently aligned handshake agreement I just read between the Pac-12, the Big Ten, and the ACC.
Yeah, I mean, we're in a period of seismic shifts in the intercollegiate landscape, right? I mean, Alston, NIL, SEC, and other conference realignment. This newly formed alliance, in quotation marks, for what this will be, which is really just a response to try to get some equity with the SEC. I think it's in theory a great time to be a college athlete, right? And some long overdue equity coming their way. I worry about how this is all going to shake out. You certainly worry about competitive balance, and what that ultimately will look like between kind of the big guys, the Power 5, and even kind of that subgroup within the Power 5. It's almost like the top of the Power 5 or Power 4, whatever it ultimately becomes, and we'll see whether the Big 12, right? We'll see.
Exactly.
But it's an interesting moment. Great power play by the SEC. I mean, you get to get Texas and Oklahoma together to come over was a fantastic move for them. Really, if there was any doubt about what the power conference is in intercollegiate athletics, it is the SEC. But there's a lot to be done. This whole notion of a constitutional convention and really truly reforming the way that the college landscape looks like, and in particular the NCAA. We're seeing, will continue to be more of a laissez-faire approach that we've seen, or at least that they profess to seeing in the NIL space. What's going to happen with federal legislation, or model at a which would be great, but model legislation which may not be as effective in addressing the myriad issues that are in the space. It seems like it's one of those industries where every decade or so there's kind of a seismic shift in the landscape, and it's usually conference realignment. I was involved as an expert in the Northwestern University football players attempted unionization case, which was a truly an educational experience, and one that I was very fortunate to be a part of. But it's like almost every, and that was 2014. So it's almost like every decade, right? There's something that happens. It's a constant quest to find a better model.
Well, it's interesting when I think about it and I look at what's happened in the SEC and this recent agreement of sorts among three other conferences. And it begs sort of the underlying question as to what is the future of the NCAA, especially given the decision in Alston,
Yeah.
which pretty much said you are not exempt from antitrust.
Correct.
Which sort of neuters to a certain extent the NCAA, and where they come out and they say, "Oh, these are our proposed rules," that there's no teeth because they can't enforce. At least that's my reading of Alston.
Well, certainly without even going to the extreme of the Kavanaugh opinion, right? I mean, which I think we can all agree that that's kind of an outlier, and that will be forever used as rationale for whatever rebel forces may align, right, against the NCAA and college athletics in general. So let's put that aside. But I think.
But let me interject for 1 second.
Yeah.
That Kavanaugh sentence, that crazy sentence that he inserted, makes me think that if some other Northwestern group wants to show up in the Supreme Court, they got an ally.
Yeah, they have fodder, right? But what was interesting is that the other 8 justices didn't join in that.
Correct.
Right. So, was he just off on frolic and detour and stating his own opinion? I tend to think it was more that, but yeah, you can certainly point to, hey, we've got a friend in Justice Kavanaugh, right? There's no doubt about that, and made his opinions very, very clear. But one that, putting that aside, I think that Alston hamstrings the NCAA. Right. In many ways. And it was very clear that, they can kind of delegate down to the conference level, and conferences can choose to do different things than the NCAA does. And I think that makes sense. Right. I mean, from an antitrust perspective, you wouldn't think about any of the conferences as meeting any of the kind of many characteristics that you would use to describe a monopoly or an attempt of monopoly under Section 1 or Section 2. But I think that a lot of times, whether it's sports or elsewhere, change is initiated from outside the organization, right? And if you go back to the creation of the NCAA in 1905, and you had Teddy Roosevelt calling the leaders of the big schools of the day, NYU, MIT, right, Harvard, to the White House for this conference, and this threat of federal intervention, and specifically banning the sport of football, right, which was kind of the hot topic at the time. Then the NCAA was then formed as a result of that, right, and to really promote the health and safety of what was not the phrase that was used then, but of the students, and certainly not the student athletes, as the NCAA would later coin the phrase. So I think that it was formed because of the threat of federal intervention, and maybe right, its demise ultimately will come, or certainly its scaling back will come through another piece of external intervention through the courts.
Also interesting is, and I don't really know where it goes, but I think about it when I look at NIL. I think about this old joke: the plane crashes, the riddle, the plane crashes, where do you bury this? Between California and Nevada, the plane crashes, where do you bury the survivors?
Right.
NIL is exactly that, because if I'm in a state that has no NIL rule, but my domicile is in a state that does, and I'm being paid by a company in a state that may or may not, where do you bury the survivors?
Yeah, I mean,
and without federal legislation, you're reading every day about these kids signing deals, and without federal legislation, I think there's 10 states now passed and active, and a couple more pending. no federal legislation. At some point, does the NCAA have the teeth to say, oh, you didn't follow the rules, you're ineligible?
Well, it's a mess. Right now, I think we can all agree on that. The guardrails are as broad as you could possibly imagine them to be, right? It's basically, if your state has rules, follow the state rules. If your state doesn't have rules in place and has not enacted legislation, then make the institutional policy, right? Well, thanks, right? That doesn't give you a whole lot to work with. And so you see these deals, and now we're getting into the creativity piece of the deals, which is really fun to see. But you would imagine, would federal legislation would address in one way or the other. Now, that's a whole other subject, what that federal legislation looks like. And it's the old legislation is like sausage, right? If you enjoy it, that's not how it was made, right? Yeah. So, that part of it is to be determined. There's a bunch of different versions of legislation working their way through or that have been introduced in draft stages. And none of those are going to be great. I mean, I think that, whether it's because the legislation itself doesn't make sense in its initial form, or because special interests take hold of it and say, well, no, we got to provide lifetime health insurance for these young folks. And but it's a mess right now, Bobby. It really is.
Yeah, well, I look at the thing that stuns me is, notwithstanding the fact that the person representing the sponsor, I guess you will, also happens to be, I believe, the same person that helped draft the Florida law.
Right.
Where at the U, every football player is offered a $6,000 NIL deal to promote a gym. I think that stretches the limits of everything, in my opinion. Am I off base? Or I guess maybe under the Florida statute, it's okay. It just seems to me pay for play.
It seems to be that way. I would agree with you. I mean, and I think legally it fits under the statute. I think it's well within it. But it gets to this, well, is this really what was intended here? And again, they see the creativity, right? How about BYU with the walk-ons, and the benefits that good for those young folks, right? Yeah. They're paying for tuition, and tuition is not very expensive. I'm not sure that this is, there's been conversation, is this scalable or not? I think it is, because, why wouldn't you go down this road, right? So if you could get every football player, every student athlete at University of Alabama, if a company comes in and says, hey, we're gonna pay for the walk-ons. Now, remind you, they're not paying them. They're not actually paying their tuition. They're paying them the cash value of what tuition is, right? So that goes back to, well, then why do we have scholarship limits in place, right? So you can see, again, like competitive balance potential. You've got the 85 scholarship limit now, but if you've got a company that says, or a sponsor that says, or just a wealthy benefactor that says, hey, we'll pay for all the walk-ons, right? And we'll pay for, and essentially give them a scholarship. That's an end run around the scholarship rules. And who's to say you couldn't go back to the old days of the biggest, schools having, 140 people on the football team who are essentially on scholarship. Right now you can have that, but only 85 can be on scholarship. And then you start to see, like Alabama's third string could potentially make the BCS, right? Or the CFP, I should say, right? So it's a lot to be sorted out. There's no question about it.
Yeah, well, I think it's time for Schropp to write the follow-up to the miseducation of the student athlete. I think there's a lot of material out there, and it's changed. And when you read about, the changes in the creation of the phrase, the student athlete in the 30s, to try to mask what was going on. And we're in another era, 90 years later, 100 years down the road from that, where some of the same issues are cropping up. And, where is the balance? Where is the fairness? And who's in charge? I mean, we know from Alston that schools are definitely in charge. Conferences are probably okay in charge. But beyond that, it's, the Wild West, I think.
Yeah, and it's funny because you hear the Wild West phrase being thrown out there a lot. I like to think of it more as like there's just no guardrails, right? There's, the guard, or there are guardrails, but the guardrails are as broadly as you can possibly imagine them, right? So in a way, when I don't think they had it when your kids were young, because they're now fully grown up, but they certainly had it with mine. It's like when you go to the bowling alley and they put the bumpers up, right?
Oh yeah. Not when I was a kid.
Certainly not when I was a kid either, right? But when you think about that, and so the ball can careen all over and ultimately get to the end of the alley. But that's not what we think of as bowling, right? And so some of it's reimagining what we think of it. And remember that this is ultimately to the benefit of the young people, right? Generally speaking, at least as it is right now. Now, there's all sorts of potential Title IX issues. What's going to happen to the so-called Olympic sports or non-revenue sports? What's going to happen, by the way, speaking of Olympics, to Olympic athlete development, right? Where so many of these folks who we just watched competing in the Olympic Games are actually products of the NCAA system, and what happens there. There is so much to unpack here, Bobby. It is. I don't think it's one book. I think it's multiple books, quite frankly.
Yeah, and look, I think ultimately there's an educational function that is mandated or should be mandated for all the institutions, all the schools in the country, that they have to sit down with their student athletes and say, this is what we know, and even though you can put up guardrails, no matter how wide they are, it's like playing golf. There may be a wide fairway, but somehow some of us still find the out of bounds.
Oh man, you're talking to someone with a handicap that is, that is substantially higher than what I think is socially acceptable. So yes, it is. Look, the schools are in this for a race to the bottom, right? The schools want to compete. The schools want to win on all of this, which you understand, right? I mean, it's the nature of sport, and win it at most costs for many of the institutions, and but I do worry, and think about the athlete in the non-revenue sport. And by the way, some of them are doing very well so far from an NIL perspective. There's no question, and good for them. Ultimately, from an academic perspective, I always worry about the Olympic sport athlete, and I've seen this firsthand, who's traveling across the country for a midweek contest in a sport that no one is going to watch, and other than friends and family. And you wonder whether or not they need to be doing that, right? Isn't there plenty of perfectly good regional competition that will serve the same exact purpose and the values that playing sports in college promotes, right? Without missing a day and a half of class.
Right. And let's not even talk about the alleged 20-hour rule, because we know that's whatever.
Yeah, I mean, look, as someone who's worked with, who has worked with student athletes up until when I got to Columbia with eligible student athletes, and now Columbia with many former student athletes. I think I asked the question. I used to ask the question all the time about the 20-hour rule, and I had one student in my days at Penn actually who raised the hand when asked, and played on a team that was historically bad. It was like one of the worst teams at the institution. And the other students in the class were, maybe, it was kind of like snickering. Well, now we understand. Right. And so look, I mean, that 20-hour rule, there's so many exceptions to it that it doesn't really matter. It was there kind of it was window dressing in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Well, look, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to talk to us. And if any of you out there in the audience want to get your advanced degree in sports management, the place to go, or the place to apply to go. But I have one final question I have to ask you before we sign off.
Absolutely, Bobby. Anything.
Is Michigan going to beat OSU this year?
So on advice of counsel, choose not to answer that question. I'm going to invoke my Fifth Amendment rights, Bobby. Look, I mean, you know how passionate of a Michigan fan I am. It's painful. And
you and all your buddies, I know. It kills them every year.
And listen, when I was an undergraduate at Michigan, we were 3-1 against Ohio State. It was in the heart of the John Cooper era for the Buckeyes. All was well. We didn't really worry about Ohio State. And now the shoe was on the other foot. And I think, so much of this, when you talk to Ohio State folks, I had this conversation today, actually, they hate us more than we hate them. I think is a lot of it. And understood both ways. I just want to be competitive and restored. I think it's just good for college football. It's good for sports fans. And it certainly is good for my blood pressure. If the Wolverines are more competitive than they have been, but we'll see. Hope, faith, right?
Well, as another guy who wears blue and gold proudly, I hope my Cal Bears have a better season or another stellar season for your Michigan Wolverines, and the blue and gold reigns supreme and beats all those red colored schools this year.
Absolutely. And it's been like, unfortunately, it's been like, Sisyphus for the Cal Bears and football for a long time. Every other sport, fantastic. The revenue producing sports have been a little bit more challenging. But yeah, we'll be brothers in arms on that one for sure.
All right, my friend. Thank you so much for taking the time. Everybody, if you're interested in getting more active in the Sports Lawyers Association, please go to sportslaw.org, become a member, sign up, get involved. And we're always looking for more content to be delivered. So we have blogs you can write on our blog site. And if you have an idea for a webinar or a podcast, feel free to reach out and we can get that done. Scott, thank you again. It's been a pleasure, and I'll catch you soon.
Bobby, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, and stay well, my friend.